It was a quiet Tuesday morning when John took his 12-year-old daughter, Emily, to the clinic. He had noticed she'd been acting strangely over the past few weeks, avoiding eye contact, sitting in silence for hours, and flinching slightly when he tried to hug her. Emily had always been a cheerful, curious child who loved drawing and riding her bike, so this sudden change worried him. John was a single father and had done his best to raise her ever since his wife passed away 5 years ago. They had always been close, and he couldn't understand why she had grown so distant all of a sudden. At first, he thought maybe it was school, maybe she was being bullied or having trouble with her grades. But when he spoke to her teachers, they said Emily was quiet but polite and focused. He asked her directly if anything was wrong, but she always said, "I'm fine," in a low voice and walked away. He thought maybe she was just growing up, that this was part of becoming a teenager. Still, something deep in his gut told him this wasn't normal. So when Emily complained of stomach pain, John didn't wait. He called the clinic and got her an appointment that same morning. Sitting in the waiting room, John kept his arm around her, trying to comfort her, but she didn't respond. She stared at the wall blankly, her face pale, her lips tight. Other parents and children sat nearby, talking, reading, scrolling on phones. But between John and Emily, there was only silence. A nurse came out and called Emily's name, and the two stood up. As they followed the nurse through the hallway to the examination room, John noticed that Emily was walking slower than usual. Her shoulders were slumped, and she kept her eyes down. The nurse smiled kindly and told Emily to sit on the table. "The doctor will be with you shortly," she said before closing the door behind her. John sat on the chair next to the bed and tried to start a conversation. "We'll get you checked out, sweetheart. Maybe it's just a bug." Emily nodded, but didn't speak. When the doctor finally walked in, she greeted them both and introduced herself as Dr. Helen Myers. She was middle-aged, with calm eyes and a warm voice. She asked Emily a few questions, where the pain was, how long it had been happening, and if it got worse after eating. Emily answered quietly, almost whispering. Dr. Myers frowned a little, but didn't push her. She then asked John to step out of the room for a moment, so she could ask Emily a few questions in private. John hesitated, looking at his daughter, but she didn't meet his eyes. He nodded and stepped outside, standing just by the door. Inside, Dr. Myers spoke gently, asking Emily again about the pain, but also asking if anything had happened at home, at school, or anywhere else that she wanted to talk about. Emily remained silent for a long time, then said, "Can I just get the test?" Dr. Myers nodded and said they would do an ultrasound to see what was going on. When John came back into the room, the doctor explained the plan. Emily lay back on the table, and Dr. Myers prepared the ultrasound machine. She squeezed some cold gel on Emily's lower stomach and began moving the wand gently over her skin. The screen beside them showed black and white shapes moving. Dr. Myers narrowed her eyes and leaned in closer. Her hand froze for a moment. John leaned forward. "Is everything okay?" he asked. Dr. Myers didn't answer at first. She stared at the screen and then slowly looked at John. Her face had changed. The calm kind of look was gone. Now, she looked pale, almost scared. I need to call someone," she said quietly, her voice shaky. Emily's eyes filled with tears, and John suddenly felt cold all over. He didn't understand what was happening, but deep down, he knew something was very, very wrong. John sat frozen in the chair, unsure what to say or do. He looked at Emily, who was now turned slightly to the side, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. Her eyes avoided his, and she looked like she wanted to disappear. Dr. Myers quietly stepped out of the room, leaving the door slightly ajar. John could hear her speaking quickly on the phone, her voice tense but quiet. The soft hum of the ultrasound machine still echoed in the room, and John suddenly felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He turned to Emily and tried to sound calm. "Sweetheart, what's going on? Why is the doctor worried?" Emily didn't answer. She bit her lip, her eyes welling up again. "Did someone hurt you?" John asked, his voice breaking. "You have to tell me, Emmy." She finally looked at him, and what he saw in her face shook him. It was fear, deep raw fear, and something else, guilt. Before she could speak, Dr. Myers returned with another woman. She introduced her as Dr. Lisa Howard, a specialist. Lisa took one glance at the ultrasound screen, and her face dropped. She stepped closer, adjusted the probe on Emily's belly, and studied the screen carefully. Then she whispered something to Dr. Myers. The two doctors looked at each other, then turned toward John. "Mr. Harper," Dr. Myers began, her voice slow and cautious. "There's something we need to tell you. But first, has Emily ever been alone with someone you didn't trust? Anyone acting strange around her recently?" John shook his head quickly. "No, never. We don't have many visitors. I work from home, and I keep a close eye on her." "Why? What is it?" Dr. Howard spoke next, carefully choosing her words. "The scan shows something very serious. Emily is pregnant, about 10 weeks along." The words didn't make sense at first. John stared at her blankly, like he had misheard. He felt the air rush out his lungs. "What?" he whispered. "That's impossible. She's just a child. She wouldn't." Emily's had dropped as the tears began to fall. "I didn't want to tell anyone," she said through sobs. "I was scared. I didn't know what to do." John couldn't believe what he was hearing. The room started to spin. He felt like he was in a nightmare. "Who did this to you?" he asked, his voice trembling. Emily cried harder and shook her head. "He said if I told, he'd hurt you. He said nobody would believe me." John reached for her hand, his own shaking. "Who, Emily? You have to tell me. Please." She whispered a name so softly it was barely audible. John's blood turned cold. It was someone he knew, not a stranger. It was his younger brother, Mike, who had come to stay with him for a few days last month. John thought Mike was helping him, just being a good uncle. Mike had taken Emily to the park, helped her with homework, even read her bedtime stories when John had late work calls. John had trusted him completely, and now, hearing his name from his daughter's lips made John's hands ball into fists. The doctors gave them privacy. Stepping out quietly, John held Emily close, his heart breaking. "You didn't do anything wrong," he whispered. "None of this is your fault. I promise you, we're going to fix this. I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." Emily sobbed in his arms. The weight of the secret finally lifted. Outside the room, Dr. Myers had already called the authorities. A report was being filed, and a social worker was on her way. But inside the room, it was just a father holding his daughter. Their lives changed forever in one moment. And as much as John wanted to stay strong, his mind was racing. What would happen next? How would they move forward from this? Would Emily ever feel safe again? The hours that followed felt like a blur to John. After the police arrived, questions came quickly and heavily. Names, dates, details that made John's stomach twist. Emily had to repeat things she didn't want to say, and John had to hear things he never imagined were possible. The officer handling the case was gentle, understanding the weight of the situation, and assured them that Mike would be found and arrested. A nurse brought Emily a blanket and sat beside her, talking in a calm voice while John answered more questions in the hallway. The clinic had moved them to a private room for privacy, away from the curious eyes of others. The social worker arrived next, a kind woman named Teresa, who spoke with Emily softly, explaining that she was there to help, not to judge. She said she had worked with other children in similar situations and promised Emily that she would not be alone. John sat across from them, still trying to understand how something like this could happen right under his nose. He kept replaying every moment from the past month in his mind, when Mike offered to babysit so John could run errands, when he took Emily out for ice cream, when he said he was just trying to be a helpful uncle. It made John feel sick. How could he have been so blind? He blamed himself again and again, but each time he looked at Emily, he reminded himself that she needed him now more than ever. There was no time for guilt, only action. Teresa asked John if they had a support system, family, friends, anyone they could lean on. John shook his head. Since his wife died, they had mostly kept to themselves. His parents were gone, and most of his old friends had moved away. "We've just had each other," he said quietly. Teresa gave a small nod. "Then we'll make sure you both get support now. Emily will need counseling, medical care, and safety. And you'll need strength too, Mr. Harper. This isn't something anyone should face alone. Emily was eventually admitted to the hospital for a more detailed medical examination. John stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand when she cried and stroking her hair gently to calm her. At night, he sat in the hospital chair, refusing to sleep until she did. Doctors explained the next steps. The pregnancy was early, and they had options. John didn't pressure her. He told her it was her choice, and whatever she decided, he would support her fully. Emily was scared and confused, but she nodded slowly. "I just want to feel normal again," she said. It broke John's heart, but he smiled gently and said, "You will, one step at a time." The next morning, Mike was arrested. Police found him at a friend's house in a nearby town, pretending nothing had happened. When they told John, he felt a wave of emotion, rage, sadness, and relief all at once. The man he once called his brother would never come near Emily again, but the damage was already done. The hardest part wasn't over. It was just beginning. Back in the hospital room, Emily sat by the window, watching the sky. She looked tired but calmer than before. John brought her a small stuffed animal from the gift shop, a brown bear with a red ribbon. She smiled for the first time in days and hugged it tightly. "Thanks, Dad," she said. It was a small moment, but to John it felt like hope. They had a long road ahead, filled with doctors, therapy, and healing. But in that quiet hospital room, father and daughter sat side by side, holding on to each other and to believe that they could get through anything as long as they stayed together. Over the next few weeks, life changed completely for John and Emily. The days were no longer filled with silence and confusion, but instead with therapy sessions, medical appointments, court paperwork, and long talks between father and daughter. Emily started seeing a child therapist twice a week, someone trained to help children who had been through trauma. At first, Emily barely spoke during those sessions, but over time, she began to open up. She drew pictures, answered questions, and slowly let her guard down. The hospital connected John with a support group for parents, and while he was hesitant at first, he found comfort in talking to other fathers and mothers who had been through the unthinkable. They gave advice, shared their stories, and reminded him that healing was possible even if it took time. One of the hardest moments came when Emily had to go to court to give a statement about what happened. The judge allowed her to sit in a private room with a counselor present, and she bravely told the truth. John was proud of her strength. Mike was officially charged and denied bail. The news of his arrest made local headlines, but John ignored the noise. His only focus was on Emily. At home, he made changes to help her feel safe again. He moved her bedroom closer to his and left a nightlight on every evening. He made sure there was always someone nearby she could trust, whether it was Teresa, the social worker, Dr. Myers in the clinic, or the kind neighbors who started checking in once they heard what had happened. Slowly, Emily began to smile again. She started drawing more, not just sad pictures, but ones filled with color, flowers, animals, even a picture of her and her dad holding hands. John kept those drawings on the fridge like precious art. One morning, she asked if she could go back to school. John hesitated, worried it might be too soon, but Emily said, "I want to feel normal again. I want to see my friends." So with the school counselor's help, she returned part-time, and her classmates welcomed her back with kindness and care. Though she was quieter than before, she no longer carried the same heavy sadness in her eyes. She knew she was believed, she was safe, and most importantly, she was not alone. John was amazed by her courage. At night, they would talk more than ever. She told him how scared she had been, how much she wanted to speak out, but didn't know how. John listened without interrupting, letting her voice finally be heard. One night, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Emily looked up and said, "I thought you wouldn't believe me if I told you, but I was wrong." John's eyes filled with tears. "I'm so sorry you felt that way," he said softly. "I will always believe you. Always." In time, Emily made a decision about the pregnancy, with the support of her doctors and therapists, and after many quiet conversations with John, she chose not to carry it to term. It was a painful decision, but one that helped her feel like she was taking her life back. John stood by her through every step. In the months that followed, the bond between them grew stronger than ever. They no longer lived in silence or fear, but in understanding and support. The clinic visit that started as a mystery turned into a path of truth and healing. The doctor's panic had led to a discovery that saved Emily from more pain and helped begin her journey back to peace. And those scars remained. They walked forward together, with love, courage, and hope lighting their way.